Home stage or home court advantage is something that you hear a lot in other sports. And even players in the VCT claims that it's nice to have.
I wanted to know, since this is the first global Valorant tournament happening in North America, do you feel that there's any sort of advantage for you guys and for NRG playing on home soil?
There probably isn't an advantage, but I'm sure when we get deep in the tournament and when a lot of games are happening and we feel the NA crowd, it'll probably definitely be like a buff for us.
But with Genji being grouped in the first ever Champs hosted in Seoul, Korea, and just last year, Evil Geniuses winning at Champs LA, I want to see if this advantage is a real thing based on past Tier 1 tournaments hosted by Riot Games. Some of the common proponents of this so-called home stage advantage is that travel can be a pain in the butt for some. Being on a plane for 10 plus hours and having connecting flights is not for everyone. Then there's jet lag being a thing as well. Time not wasted because of traveling can be time used for relaxation or further practicing/training to get a slight edge or so. But let's not forget about the other logistical benefits too, like not having to worry about your visa being denied or approved. It's an issue that has hurt some teams in the past, but hopefully with a more spread out schedule for next year, that could be overcome. Then there's also the crowd being on your side, which might not be that big of a deal with some examples that we will go over later in this video. But there's also that train of thought that playing at home can actually add pressure to players or throw you out of your groove when you're used to playing at the global stage, which was echoed by a few coaches and players in the past.
With Champions 2023 being the first international tournament in North America, do you think that adds extra pressures on teams from the region to perform?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely so. You know, these guys are competitors. They definitely like the feeling of being activated, the environment of going to a different place, traveling for the tournament, things like that. So it's been a bit of a challenge for us being local and getting into that tournament groove. But
let's start off with the 2021 VCT circuit. Here we have 3 events, all being hosted by an EMEA country. I don't want to spend too much time on Masters Reykjavik, mainly because its location proved to be a neutral area for most of the competition. Yes, it's near some European countries, but everyone had to travel out here and there was no crowd to support anybody during this event. In fact, we didn't have any crowds until Copenhagen in 2022. Despite this, we see Fnatic and Team Liquid making it in the top 4. Next, we have Masters Berlin. It had a double elimination group stage and a single elimination playoffs. There were 3 EMEA/EU teams in G2, Fnatic, and Ascend. G2 being the only one with German roots, since it was founded in Germany by Carlos Rodriguez. However, none of these teams had a German player on them. But keep in mind that travel, jet lag, and expenses impact these teams as well. All 3 were able to make it to the playoffs, where we saw the likes of G2 and Gambit Esports making it into the top 4. And here we actually see Gambit Esports win the whole thing. In Champs 2021, we had 4 European teams, and all 4 made it past the group stage. However, this time there was no German teams or players for Champs Berlin. However, 3 out of the top 4 were also based in EU, with Ascend winning it all. Fnatic were close too, and they were the only EMEA team to lose to a non-EU org in this whole event. During the 2022 stage, we have 3 global tier 1 events, and all 3 again were being hosted by a European nation. I would like to mention that this year would be the last time EMEA were seen as a super region. Could hosting these events greatly benefited this region, or were EU teams just further ahead of everyone else? It could be a mixture of both, but I personally want to side more with the latter, since CS professionals flooded Valorant's pro scene. And Europe has always been seen as a powerhouse in that game, so it makes sense for those teams kinda to have a head start. Regardless, we see ourselves in Reykjavik again, where only Fnatic failed to make it out of the group stages. Team Liquid were able to push through, but struggle a bit in the playoffs. Overall, there were no EMEA teams in the top 4 of Reykjavik. G2 came close, and I want to mention that FPX weren't present due to the traveling issues. Some did say they were EMEA's best team at this moment. Next, we have Masters Copenhagen. Both Guild and FPX made it out of the group stages, and I do want to mention that we have Cider from Fun Plus Phoenix as the team sub. He was actually from Denmark and filled in for the team because one of their players found themselves in visa troubles. Here, we see both Fnatic and FPX in the top 4, with Fnatic actually losing to them in the lower bracket before Fun Plus Phoenix claimed the grand prize. And lastly, for the 2022 circuit, we have Turkey. The only Turkish player at this event was Alpha, who was going crazy as Raze, especially when playing on Bind. The man had a 325 ACS and a 217 ADR when facing Team Liquid on the map. But it gets even more impressive, with stat lines of 369 ACS, 239 ADR, and a 4-1 first blood to first death ratio when going against 100 Thieves on Bind. However, I do want to point out that he was already playing pretty well on Raze during Copenhagen, which was his first global tournament. Like I said, this would be the last time EMEA were seen as super regions. I made a video about EMEA's 2023 record when you include Fnatic's wins and when you don't. It kind of explains why people called EMEA a one-team region. But before the 2023 season, the first 6 international events were hosted by EMEA countries, and that was the last time they were the most dominant. It would be wise to point out that correlation doesn't always equate to causation though. However, this is a strong case for not having to deal with jet lag and the fact that your fans have an easier access to cheer for you, which can impact one's performance. Until we go into the 2023 season, that is. Here we're starting things off with Sao Paulo's Brazil's lock-in. We had 3 Brazilian teams as well as 2 orgs in Sentinels and Crew that had Brazilian players. This was a single elimination, which is pretty rough. Something that MIBR felt when they lost their initial game to Talon. Furia did beat T1 and had a crazy 10-round overtime loss to Fnatic on Haven, the eventual tournament winners. Loud also did pretty amazing with a 2nd place finish. Crew did have some success with their Brazilian players, and you can say that Pekata and Sasi were solid too despite Sentinel's loss to Fnatic. I do want to mention that the crowds were loud and electric when Brazilian teams were playing. If there was ever a case for a crowd impacting a team's performance, you would find it here. However, for the rest of the year though, these results kind of stayed the same. Sentinels and Furia would beat the bad teams most of the time, but struggle against actual title contenders, just like how they did in Lock-In. Crew was an anomaly, where they lost 9 straight games in a row and had to replace their Brazilian players throughout the season. They will eventually go on a run and win LCQ. Loud will continue to do Loud things and win Americas, and be one of the only 2 teams of 2023 to beat Fnatic in a Riot-sponsored event. If there was such a thing as home court advantage, then we would have seen a different performance among all these Brazilian teams, but there wasn't much. Things kind of just stayed the same. Loud did struggle in Masters Tokyo, but I would like to mention that they bounced back pretty well in Champs. If anything, I don't think Loud got worse. I think a select few teams just got better throughout the season. And speaking of Masters Tokyo, it had no Japanese players. However, there were some Pacific teams there. T1 got group, which is very on brand for them. DRX had an amazing group stage, but faded in the playoffs, which is also on brand for them as well. PaperX actually shocked everyone by getting 3rd place despite not having their star rookie in something participate, and instead have CGRS as a sub for them, a content creator. However, in Champs, the same thing will happen, where T1 got grouped, DRX dominated a tough as nails Group D, and PaperX made it to the podium. To be fair though, maybe Japan isn't really considered home court advantage since everyone had to fly out to this specific island. And the crowd was pretty neutral too. If someone did something spectacular, they would cheer regardless where you were from. I do want to point out that Pacific's league is based in Korea, which might explain why we tend to see more Korean teams make it to international tournaments during this time. For Champs 2023 LA, we had 4 Americas teams, 2 of which were able to make it out of the group stages, 1 being from NA and 1 being from South America. And because we had 2 move on, that means that 2 also failed to get out of the groups. One of which was NRG, a North American team, and Crew, a South American team. EG were able to win this event, but they were already on a trajectory to win it all. They got 3rd place in Americas, 2nd in Tokyo, and eventually 1st place in Champs LA. During the 2024 season, we had events in EMEA, China, and Pacific. None in Americas. However, Sentinels won Madrid and shocked many in Korea. Shoot, Loud did pretty well in Madrid, and G2 went crazy in China. These Americas teams did all of this without any home court advantage. However, in Madrid, we have Team Heretics, a Spanish org, that currently doesn't have any Spanish players. Despite this, the crowd were still cheering hard for them to win. And honestly, Madrid has been my favorite event so far this year. Champions hasn't ended yet, so that could change. Regardless, KC failed to make it to playoffs like Team Heretics. But I do want to mention that both these teams didn't go down without a fight against their oppositions. Something that we can't say the same for Chinese teams in Shanghai. There were a total of 3 Chinese teams, 7 series that they played, 17 maps fought on, and only 1 overall series win. At least they won the show match, you know, like how most home teams do. If there was such a thing as home court advantage, then you will find it here. It would be kind of a party pooper if they didn't win anyways. But now let's fast forward to Champs 2024 in Seoul, Korea. Gen.G got unlucky with this group draw, but many still had them moving out as favorites. A Korean team that made it to both Masters, Madrid, and Shanghai's finals. Speaking of which, they actually won Shanghai despite people who were watching the live streams not hearing any cheers from the crowd when they made highlights. It almost felt like the crowd was against them. Then we have DRX, who usually makes it out of groups anyways, and their win over Fnatic though was still impressive. Overall, when it comes to the idea of having home stage advantage, it doesn't really seem that real. I can see that it benefits the orgs themselves and certain players who have to deal with visa issues like Brazilian and Russian contestants. But I think the reason why home stage advantage really isn't that big of a thing is that Valorant is already a mentally demanding game. So if you're good enough to make it to this stage, then chances are that you having a crowd to cheer for you or not won't impact you that much. However, there are players like Busio who thrives off the energy, whether you root for them or against them. Regardless, these guys are the best of the best. And I would assume that they practice like crazy, so much so that they won't let certain outside factors weigh them down once a new round starts. But those are just my opinions. You let me know what you think. Is home stage advantage a thing, or is it usually just the better team wins out? Barring visa issues, of course. But hey, stay safe and I'll be yapping in the next one.